When I married Rebecca, I didn't just gain a wife, I inherited the most precious responsibility a man could ask for. Emma was just 18 months old, all chubby cheeks and curious eyes, when I first became her father. Not by blood, but by a choice I made every single day for 16 years. Until my wife decided, at our daughter's birthday party, that it was time for Emma to meet her real dad, a man who, by some cosmic joke of the universe, had recently started mopping the floors at the company I built from nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first time I held Emma in my arms, she looked up at me with those big hazel eyes, Rebecca's eyes, and something shifted inside me. I wasn't just dating a single mother anymore. I was becoming someone's father. I remember the weight of her tiny body against my chest, her little hand wrapped around my finger, and I made a silent promise. I would always be there. I would be the kind of father who never walked away, who showed up for every moment, big or small. Rebecca had been struggling when we met, exhausted, working 2 jobs, her dreams of finishing college shelved indefinitely after Emma's biological father vanished the moment pregnancy became reality. She had this sadness behind her smile, this wariness that made her hold her heart at a distance. But over time, as she watched me with Emma, changing diapers without complaint, pacing the floor during midnight fevers, treating this child as if she carried my DNA, that wariness began to dissolve. "You're different," she would whisper in the darkness of our bedroom, her head on my chest. "Most men wouldn't do this, wouldn't love her like you do. Most men are fools then," I would answer. And I meant it. I never once thought of Emma as anything less than my daughter. The word stepdaughter felt foreign on my tongue, inappropriate somehow. When I proposed to Rebecca, I brought 2 rings, one for her and a tiny heart necklace for Emma. I got down on my knees before both of them. "I'm asking to be a husband and a father today," I said, my voice cracking as Emma, not quite 3, clapped her hands in delight at the shiny objects. "I want to be there for both of you forever," Rebecca cried. Later, she told me it was because she finally believed that good men existed, that Emma would grow up with a real father, a real father. That phrase would come back to haunt me in ways I could never have imagined. I wasn't born into money. My father worked at the local steel mill in Westbrook, a small town where ambition was often viewed with suspicion. My mother cleaned houses. For the wealthier families across the river, they were good people, hard-working, honest, loving, but constantly exhausted, worn down by the effort of staying afloat. "Study hard," my father would tell me, his hands rough with calluses. A brain is your ticket out." I took his advice seriously. Scholarships got me through state college, where I majored in computer science and business. While other students partied, I worked on a software idea, a streamlined inventory management system designed specifically for mid-sized manufacturing businesses. Nothing revolutionary, just a practical solution to problems I'd observed at my summer jobs. By my senior year, I had a working prototype and 2 small local businesses using it. 5 years later, Parker Systems employed 27 people. 10 years after that, we had offices in 3 states and over 400 employees. The software had evolved, as had our services, but the core remained the same, practical solutions delivered with personal attention. I met Rebecca when my company was already successful. She came to interview for an executive assistant position, walking into my office with a crisp resume and an apology for not having a babysitter that morning. Emma sat quietly on her lap during the interview, clutching a worn, stuffed rabbit, occasionally whispering questions into her mother's ear. I found myself captivated not by Rebecca's professional qualifications, which were admittedly less impressive than other candidates, but by the gentle, patient way she answered her daughter's whispered questions without breaking her professional demeanor. By the strength it took to show up, toddler in tow, and still command respect. "I understand if the gap in my employment history is concerning," she said toward the end of the interview, a hint of resignation in her voice. She'd likely heard the same rejection before. "But I can assure you that I'm incredibly organized, efficient, and I learn quickly." "The gap doesn't concern me," I replied. "Raising a child is more demanding than most jobs I know, but I am curious. Why apply here?" "Your background is in education," she straightened her shoulders. "Because teaching jobs allow very little flexibility. For single parents, the pay is insufficient for childcare, and your company has a reputation for work-life balance. Emma is my priority, but I also need to build a career that can support her." Her honesty was refreshing. I hired her that afternoon. We didn't begin dating until almost a year later. I was cautious. Office relationships came with complications, and Rebecca had made it clear early on that she and Emma were a package deal. Any man in her life would need to understand that Emma came first, always. Our first date wasn't dinner or a movie. It was a Saturday morning at the Children's Museum. Emma racing ahead of us to touch everything interactive, Rebecca and I following. At a respectful distance, conversation flowing effortlessly between exhibits. Watching Rebecca point out colors and shapes to her daughter, getting down on her knees to see things from Emma's perspective, I found myself falling for both of them simultaneously. We married when Emma was 4, in a small ceremony with Emma as our flower girl, proudly tossing rose petals and announcing to everyone that Mommy and Daddy are getting married today. It was the first time she had called me Daddy, unprompted. Rebecca and I both cried. I legally adopted Emma when she was 5. The paperwork was a formality. In my heart, she had been mine since that first day at the Children's Museum. Her biological father, a man named Daniel Walker, had signed away his rights without hesitation when contacted by our lawyer. No child support had ever been paid, no birthday cards sent, no interest shown in any capacity. "He's not worth thinking about," Rebecca would say dismissively on the rare occasions his name came up. "He made his choice long ago." As Emma grew, so did my business. Parker Systems became a fixture in the business community. We expanded our headquarters, taking over an entire office building downtown. I worked hard, but I made sure never to miss the important moments. Dance recitals, science fairs, parent-teacher conferences. I coached Emma's soccer team for 3 seasons, despite knowing embarrassingly little about the sport. I learned alongside her. Home was a sanctuary, a place where titles and business concerns fell away, where I was simply Emma's dad and Rebecca's husband. We had our struggles, like any family. Rebecca sometimes bristled at the wealth that gradually surrounded us, uncomfortable with household, help, or expensive vacations. Emma went through typical phases, the boundary-testing 3s, the dramatic preteen years. But we were solid, united, a family built on choice rather than obligation. On weekends, I'd make pancakes in shapes requested by Emma, the kitchen filling with laughter and the scent of maple syrup. For her 10th birthday, I built her a treehouse in our backyard, working nights after she went to bed so it would be a surprise. When she turned 13, I took her to New York to see her first Broadway show, the 2 of us singing the songs the entire flight home. "You spoil her," Rebecca would sometimes say, but with a smile that told me she approved. "I'm making memories," I'd reply. "That's different from spoiling." And they were beautiful memories. Emma growing from a toddler with unsteady steps to a confident teenager with her mother's hazel eyes and a laugh that could light up a room. Rebecca finding her footing professionally, eventually leaving her position as my assistant to return to education, teaching at a private school where Emma was given a scholarship. Our home filled with artwork and science projects, homework spread across the dining table, family movie nights with bowls of popcorn balanced precariously between us. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thought I had done everything right. I thought I had built something unbreakable. Should have known better. Emma's 16th birthday was supposed to be perfect. I had planned for months, securing reservations at Bellamy's, her favorite restaurant, where the chef made those chocolate soufflés she loved. The guest list included her closest friends, a few favorite teachers, and family members who had flown in specially for the occasion. Rebecca had handled the decorations, transforming the restaurant's private room into something that resembled a sophisticated fairy garden with twinkling lights and delicate flowers woven through lattice archways. I arrived early that evening, carrying the small blue box from Tiffany's that contained the diamond pendant I'd selected with painstaking care. Not too flashy. Emma had inherited her mother's understated taste, but elegant enough to mark the importance of the milestone. 16, my little girl, now teetering on the edge of womanhood, already talking about college applications and future plans. "Everything looks beautiful," I told Rebecca, kissing her cheek as I surveyed the room. "You've outdone yourself." "She deserves it," Rebecca replied, adjusting a centerpiece that didn't need adjusting. There was something tense in her movements, a tightness around her eyes that I attributed to the stress of party planning. "She's growing up so fast, James." "Too fast," I agreed, thinking of the driving lessons I'd been giving her, the way my heart had hammered in my chest the first time she took the wheel. "But she's turning into an amazing young woman. We did good." Rebecca gave me a strange look, then one I would later replay in my mind countless times. A mixture of guilt and determination, quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Yes," she said softly. "We did." I should have pressed her, should have asked what was behind that look. But the catering staff arrived with questions about the appetizer. A service, and the moment slipped away like sand through fingers. Guests began to arrive. Emma's friends, in their carefully selected outfits, giggling and taking selfies in front of the decorations. My parents, still marveling at the life I'd built, proudly introducing themselves as Emma's grandparents. Rebecca's sister Natalie, who had flown in from Colorado, embracing Emma with the kind of fierce love only aunts can deliver. And then Emma herself arrived, escorted by her best friend Zoe's parents, who had picked her up after her afternoon dance class. She paused in the doorway, her eyes widening at the transformation of the space, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "Dad," she called, weaving through guests to throw her arms around me. "This is amazing." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, feeling the momentary weight of her leaning into me before she pulled back to survey the room again. "Do you like it?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the way her eyes sparkled. "I love it," she declared. "It's exactly what I wanted. Thank you." Simple words, but they filled me with a satisfaction no business success could match. This was what mattered. This young woman's happiness, the knowledge that I had contributed to it, had helped shape the person she was becoming. The evening progressed perfectly. Dinner was served, conversation flowed, and Emma opened gifts with genuine appreciation for each one. When she unwrapped my pendant, her hands stilled, and her expression softened. "It's beautiful," she whispered, immediately asking me to help her put it on. As I fastened the clasp at the back of her neck, her fingers touched the diamond. "I'll wear it always." "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She hugged me again, and I thought, this is it. This is what it means to be a father. This quiet certainty that you would move mountains for this person, that their joy is somehow more vital than your own. Rebecca clinked her glass then, standing to propose a toast. She looked elegant in a navy dress I hadn't seen before. Her hair swept up, her smile confident as all eyes turned toward her. "To Emma," she began. 16 years ago, you came into my life and changed everything for the better. You've grown into a young woman with more grace, intelligence, and compassion than I could have ever hoped for. Standard toast material, delivered with genuine warmth. But then Rebecca's voice shifted, became more deliberate, as if she were reading, and from a script she'd rehearsed. Family is complicated, she continued. It's built on love, yes, but also on truth. And there are truths we sometimes keep hidden, thinking we're protecting the people we love. A strange hush fell over the room. Emma's smile faltered slightly, confusion creeping into her expression. I felt the first prickle of unease crawl up my spine. "Emma, honey," Rebecca said, her eyes now fixed solely on our daughter. "There's someone here tonight who has wanted to meet you for a very long time. Someone who is a part of your story, your history, your biological heritage." The word biological hung in the air like a thunderclap. I froze, my glass halfway to my lips, as Rebecca gestured toward the doorway. A man stepped forward, tall, wiry, with the same hazel eyes as Emma, the same slight dimple in his left cheek when he attempted a nervous smile. "This is Daniel Walker," Rebecca announced, her voice steady despite the grenade she was detonating in the middle of our family celebration. "Your birth father." The room went silent. Emma's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances. My parents stiffened in their seats. And me? I felt as though I'd been plunged into ice water, every nerve ending suddenly, painfully alive. Daniel Walker took another step forward, his hands shoved awkwardly into the pockets of jeans that had seen better days. There was nothing remarkable about him, just another man in his late 30s with thinning hair and the weathered look of someone who had made more hard choices than easy ones. But the way he looked at Emma, hungry, hopeful, reverent, made my stomach clench. "Hi, Emma," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. It's really good to finally meet you." Emma sat perfectly still, her fingers frozen around the stem of her water glass. She looked from Daniel to Rebecca, then to me, her eyes wide with shock and something else, curiosity perhaps, or the first tremors of a seismic shift in her understanding of herself. "I don't understand," she finally said, her voice small. "Mom!" Rebecca moved to stand beside Daniel, not quite touching him, but close enough to signal alliance. "Daniel reached out to me about 2 months ago. He's been wanting to be part of your life for a long time." A lie. It had to be. 16 years of silence, of complete absence, and suddenly he wanted to be part of her life. The man who had abandoned, a pregnant woman without a backward glance, was now standing in my daughter's birthday celebration, as if he had any right to be there. I should have spoken then, should have pulled Rebecca aside and demanded to know what the hell she was thinking, springing this on Emma, on all of us, without warning. But I was paralyzed by the look on Emma's face. That terrible mixture of confusion and wonder and hurt. "You knew about this?" Emma asked, turning to me with an expression that cut deeper than any knife. "No," I managed, finding my voice at last. "I had no idea." Rebecca shot me a warning look. "James, please, this is important for Emma." Important for Emma or important for Rebecca? I couldn't understand what was happening, couldn't process the betrayal unfolding before me. This night that was supposed to celebrate our daughter had suddenly become about someone else entirely. This stranger, claiming biological rights he had relinquished years ago. "I think," I said, struggling to keep my voice level, "that this might be a conversation better had in private, after the party." "No," Rebecca replied firmly. "Emma deserves to know who she is, where she comes from. Daniel is part of that." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware of the tension he had walked into. "I just wanted to meet her," he said. "See what kind of young lady she's grown into." I'm not trying to cause problems, but he already had. His very presence was a problem, a repudiation of everything I had built, everything I had been to Emma for 16 years. Father, protector, the constant in her life, and now, in the eyes of everyone in that room, I had been reduced to something else, something less. The word echoed in my mind, cruel and unavoidable: replacement. The rest of Emma's birthday party unfolded like a poorly written tragedy. Some guests made awkward excuses and left early. Those who stayed maintained forced smiles, pretending that the introduction of a long-absent biological father was a perfectly normal addition to a sweet 16 celebration. My parents exchanged worried glances, my mother reaching under the table to squeeze my hand in silent support. Emma, to her credit, handled the situation with more poise than any 16-year-old should have to muster. She was polite to Daniel, answering his tentative questions about school and her interests, but I could see the confusion swirling behind her eyes. The pendant I had given her seemed to weigh heavily against her collarbone, her fingers repeatedly touching it as if to remind herself of something solid and certain in a world suddenly turned unpredictable. I maintained my composure through dessert, through the half-hearted singing of "Happy Birthday," through the cutting of a cake that now seemed absurdly festive, given the circumstances. But beneath the table, my hands were clenched so tightly that my nails left crescent moons embedded in my palms. Rebecca acted as though she had orchestrated something wonderful, a heartwarming reunion rather than an ambush. She moved between Emma and Daniel, facilitating conversation, smiling encouragingly, placing her hand on Daniel's arm with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. When the last guest finally departed, leaving just our immediate family and Daniel in the private dining room, Emma turned to Rebecca with uncharacteristic directness. "Why didn't you tell me before tonight?" she asked. "Why in front of everyone?" Rebecca's smile faltered slightly. "I thought it would be special. A meaningful addition to your birthday." "It wasn't your decision to make alone," I interjected, finally finding my voice. "Something this important should have been discussed as a family." "I was trying to do what's best for Emma," Rebecca said, a defensive edge creeping into her tone. "By blindsiding her, by blindsiding me?" I struggled to keep my volume in check. "How is that what's best for anyone?" Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. "Look, maybe I should go. I don't want to cause problems between you all." "You're not causing problems," Rebecca assured him quickly. "James is just surprised, that's all." Surprised was an understatement so profound it bordered on insulting. I was demolished, gutted. Watching 16 years of fatherhood being casually recontextualized by the sudden appearance of a man who had contributed nothing but DNA. Emma looked. Between us, her shoulders tense, her expression unreadable. "I'd like to go home now," she said quietly. "Please." The drive home was silent. Emma sat in the back seat, staring out the window, her reflection in the glass showing eyes that blinked. Too rapidly, Rebecca typed furiously on her phone. Texting Daniel, I assumed, though I couldn't bring myself to ask. I gripped the steering wheel and focused on the road, trying to process what had just happened, what it meant for our family. When we arrived home, Emma went straight to her room, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. I turned to Rebecca in the hallway, keeping my voice low to avoid being overheard. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been in contact with him?" Rebecca sighed, slipping off her heels and padding toward the kitchen. I followed, waiting as she poured herself a glass of water. 3 months, she finally admitted. "He found me on social media. Sent a message saying he'd been thinking about Emma, wondering how she was doing. 3 months, I repeated. You've been planning this for 3 months and never once thought to mention it to me. Your husband, the man who has been raising Emma since she was a toddler? I knew you'd react like this," she said, setting down her glass. "I knew you'd try to prevent it, Prevent what, exactly? Prevent Emma from being blindsided at her own birthday party. Prevent her from having to process complex emotions in front of an audience. Yes, Rebecca, I might have suggested a different approach. Rebecca's expression hardened. Emma has a right to know her biological father. I have never disputed that, I said, my frustration mounting. What I'm disputing is how you went about this. The secrecy, the public spectacle, the complete disregard for me as Emma's father. You're not her biological father, Rebecca said, the words slicing through the air between us. I stepped back as if physically struck. In 16 years of marriage, through all our disagreements and challenges, Rebecca had never once used that distinction as a weapon. I see, I said, my voice suddenly calm in a way that surprised even me. And is that how you've always seen it? That I'm somehow less her father because we don't share DNA? Rebecca had the grace to look ashamed. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, I replied. Otherwise, you wouldn't have used those exact words. I turned away, needing distance, needing to breathe air that wasn't heavy with betrayal. I'm going to check on Emma. I paused outside Emma's door, collecting myself before knocking softly. Emma, it's Dad. Can I come in? There was a moment of silence then. Yeah, she was sitting on her bed, still in her party dress, her knees pulled up to her chest. The pendant I had given her gleamed against her skin as she looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Hey, I said gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. That was quite a night. A weak laugh escaped her. Not exactly the sweet 16 I expected. No, I agreed. Not what any of us expected. I hesitated, then added, I want you to know I had no idea your mom was planning this. I would never have let you be surprised like that. Emma nodded. I figured. You looked as shocked as I felt. She picked at a loose thread on her bedspread. Did you know he was back in touch with Mom? No, sweetheart. This is the first I've heard anything about Daniel in years. She should have told us, Emma said, a flash of anger in her voice. Both of us. Yes, I agreed, she should have. Emma was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I had been dreading. What happens now? It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment Daniel Walker stepped into that restaurant. What happened now? How did we navigate this unexpected intrusion into our carefully constructed family? That's partly up to you, I said carefully. If you want to get to know Daniel, that's your choice. I won't stand in the way of that. And if I don't, she asked, watching my face intently, then that's your choice too, I assured her. No one, not me, not your mother, not Daniel, gets to decide that for you. She nodded slowly, processing this. He seems, I don't know, not what I expected. What did you expect? I'm not sure I ever expected anything, she admitted. I never really thought about him much. You've always been my dad. Her voice broke slightly on the word dad, and she quickly wiped at her eyes. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I am your dad, Emma. Nothing that happened tonight changes that, not for me. She squeezed back, then surprised me by moving closer for a hug. I held her as she cried quietly against my shoulder, feeling simultaneously heartbroken for her confusion and selfishly grateful for her affirmation of our bond. I love you, Dad, she whispered eventually. I love you too, sweetheart, I replied, always. As she pulled away, wiping her eyes, she gave me a watery smile. At least the party was nice. Before, you know. It was, I agreed, relieved to see a glimpse of her usual resilience. And you still got that chocolate souffle you love. True, she said, her smile strengthening slightly. Small victories. I stood, knowing she needed space to process. Try to get some sleep, okay? We can talk more tomorrow if you want. She nodded, already reaching for her phone, probably to text her friends about the evening's dramatic turn. At the door, I paused. Emma, whatever you decide about Daniel, it doesn't change us. You'll always be my daughter." She looked up, suddenly, seeming much younger than 16. "Promise?" "Promise," I said firmly. Nothing could ever change that. As I closed her door, I wished I felt as confident as I sounded, because despite my words of reassurance, something fundamental had shifted. That night, a stone had been thrown into the still waters of our family, and the ripples were only beginning to spread. I barely slept that night, lying awake beside Rebecca, the space between us in our king-sized bed feeling wider than it ever had. She had attempted to talk after I left Emma's room, but I wasn't ready, not without saying things I might regret. Instead, I claimed exhaustion and retreated to my side of the bed, back turned, eyes fixed on the window where moonlight filtered through half-drawn blinds. By morning I had resigned myself to a necessary conversation. We couldn't go on with this unaddressed, this wound festering between us. Emma deserved better than parents at odds with each other, especially now. I found Rebecca in the kitchen, already dressed for work, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, her expression guarded. "We need to talk," I said, pouring myself coffee. "Really talk, without accusations or defensiveness." "For Emma's sake," Rebecca nodded, setting down her phone. "I agree. Why Daniel? Why now?" I asked, cutting straight to the heart of it. "It's been 16 years, Rebecca. 16 years of radio silence from this man, and suddenly, he's important. Enough to ambush our daughter at her birthday party," she sighed, cupping her mug between her hands. "It wasn't planned like that. When he first reached out, I ignored him, but he was persistent. He said he'd gotten sober, that he'd been reflecting on his mistakes, that he wanted to make amends." "Sober?" This was new information. "You never mentioned he had addiction issues." "There was a lot I didn't mention," she admitted. "When we met, when we got married, I was trying to leave that part of my life behind. Daniel wasn't just absent, James. He was a mess. Drugs, alcohol, couldn't hold down a job." She paused, collecting herself. "But the way he talks now, the way he presents himself, he's changed. He's been clean for 3 years. And you believed him? Just like that?" "Not just like that," she said defensively. "We met for coffee a few times. I wanted to be sure before I even considered introducing him to Emma. The thought of those secret coffee meetings made my stomach clench." "And you didn't think to include me in any of this? Your husband? Emma's father?" Rebecca had the grace to look ashamed. "I should have. I know that now. But I was afraid you'd shut it down immediately, that you wouldn't even consider the possibility that Daniel deserved a second chance." "That wasn't your decision to make alone," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "And it certainly wasn't. A decision to spring on Emma without warning." "You're right," she conceded. "The party was impulsive. Daniel had been asking to meet her, and her birthday seemed significant somehow. I thought maybe it could be a gift of sorts, a connection to her origins." She must have seen the incredulity on my face, because she quickly added, "I realize now how misguided that was." "Misguided," I repeated. "Rebecca, you undermined 16 years of parenthood in one evening. You hurt our daughter and humiliated me in front of our friends and family. That wasn't my intention," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what I thought, that it would be this beautiful moment of reunion or recognition." "Life isn't a Hallmark movie," I said, more harshly than I intended. "Real emotions are messy and complicated, and real parents, real fathers, don't just waltz back in after 16 years of absence and expect a relationship." "He doesn't expect anything," she insisted. "He just wants a chance. A chance he forfeited the moment he walked away from his pregnant girlfriend," I pointed out. "A chance he didn't earn by showing up now that all the hard work of raising Emma has been done." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with her finger. "Do you remember when we first started dating, how terrified I was to let you into Emma's life, how long it took me to trust that you wouldn't leave like he did?" I nodded. Those early days had been a delicate dance, proving myself worthy of not just Rebecca's trust, but the privilege of being in her daughter's life. "You were patient," she continued. "You understood that I needed time, that Emma needed stability and consistency. You showed up day after day until I finally believed you were there to stay." She looked up at me, her eyes imploring. "Don't. You think Daniel deserves even a fraction of that same consideration?" "No," I said bluntly. "I don't, because the situations aren't comparable. I wasn't abandoning a child I had helped create. I was stepping up, taking responsibility for a family that needed support. Daniel did the opposite." "People change, James." "Maybe they do," I conceded, "but that doesn't erase consequences. It doesn't erase 16 years of absence." A sound from the doorway made us both turn. Emma stood there in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep, her expression unreadable as she looked between us. "Morning," she said cautiously, clearly sensing the tension. Rebecca forced a bright smile. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep okay?" Emma shrugged, moving to the refrigerator. "Not really." She poured herself a glass of orange juice, then leaned against the counter, studying us both. "Were you talking about him, about Daniel?" "Yes," I admitted. "We were trying to figure out how to handle this situation." "Don't I get a say in how it's handled?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice, "since it's my life and all." "Of course." "You do," Rebecca said quickly. "That's what's most important here. What you want, what you're comfortable with." Emma took a sip of her juice, considering this. "I think I want to talk to him again," she said finally. "Not like regularly or anything, just to ask some questions." I nodded slowly, forcing myself to respect her curiosity even as it pained me. "That's fair, but on your terms, in a setting where you feel comfortable. And with you there," Emma added, looking directly at me. "Both of you." Relief flooded through me, disproportionate to such a small request. She still wanted me there, still saw me as a necessary part of this equation. "Of course," I said. "Whatever you need." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this. "I have a history test today," she said, abruptly changing the subject in that way teenagers do. "Can you quiz me after breakfast, Dad?" A simple request, but the deliberate use of Dad felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. I smiled, feeling some of the tension leave my shoulders. "Absolutely," I replied. "Let me make you some breakfast first." "Blueberry pancakes?" "Yes, please," she said, the ghost of a smile crossing her face. As I moved around the kitchen, gathering ingredients, I caught Rebecca watching us with a complicated expression. Relief mixed with something that might have been regret. For a moment it felt like any other morning in our family life, the familiar routine, a temporary balm over the uncertainty that still loomed ahead. But beneath the surface normalcy, I knew we were walking on fragile ground. Daniel Walker had re-entered our lives, and nothing would be quite the same again. The meeting with Daniel was set for the following Saturday, neutral territory at a coffee shop downtown. I suggested my office conference room for privacy, but Emma wanted somewhere more casual, somewhere she could leave easily if things became uncomfortable. Smart girl, always thinking ahead just like I'd taught her. The week leading up to Saturday passed in a strange limbo. At home, we maintained a facade of normalcy, family dinners, helping with homework, discussing college applications. But there was an undercurrent of tension, questions left unasked, emotions held in careful check. I caught Rebecca texting frequently, her phone angled away from me in a way it never had been before. Was she communicating with Daniel, making arrangements, reminiscing about old times? I didn't ask. I wasn't sure. I wanted to know. At work, I threw myself into projects with unusual intensity, staying late, bringing files home, anything to keep My mind occupied. Parker Systems was in the final stages of launching a new service platform, and the timing couldn't have been better. Work had always been my sanctuary, the place where problems had clear solutions, where effort translated directly into results. Friday afternoon, I was reviewing contracts in my office when my assistant Valerie knocked on the door. HR sent up the paperwork for the new maintenance staff, she said, placing a folder on my desk. They need your signature since they're contract positions. I nodded absently, barely glancing at the folder. I'll get to it before I leave. Hours later, with most of the office empty, I remembered the HR paperwork. Flipping open the folder, I scanned the standard contract information, reaching for a pen to sign on the designated lines. And then I saw it, a name that made my hand freeze midair, Daniel Walker. It had to be a coincidence. Walker wasn't an uncommon name. There were probably thousands of Daniel Walkers in the country. But something made me flip to the attached application, to the personal information section where a date of birth was listed. A date that aligned with the approximate age I knew Rebecca's ex to be. My throat went dry as I stared at the address, the phone number, the emergency contact, a brother named Thomas Walker. Slowly, I turned to the photo ID scan attached to the back of the application. There was no mistaking the face. The same man who had appeared at Emma's birthday party was now apparently employed as a night janitor at my company. The coincidence was too precise to be accidental. Had Rebecca arranged this? Had Daniel deliberately sought employment at my company? The latter seemed more likely, a calculated move to insert himself not just into my family, but into my professional life as well. I sat back in my chair, a cold anger settling in my stomach. This wasn't just about reconnecting with a long-lost daughter. This was something else, something that felt dangerously like an attempt to infiltrate every aspect of my life. My first impulse was to reject the contract, to ensure Daniel Walker never set foot in my building. But that would require explanation, would create questions among my HR staff, might even open the door to legal issues if he claimed discrimination. And more importantly, it would escalate a situation that was already precarious, potentially putting Emma in the middle of an ugly conflict. No, I needed to be strategic, to understand what game was being played. Before making my move, I signed the contracts, approving Daniel Walker's employment as a night janitor at Parker Systems, starting the following Monday. Then I made a note to have security provide me with access logs for his badge and to route the cleaning schedule for the executive floor to my email. Knowledge was power, and I needed every advantage I could get. Saturday morning arrived with a weight of anticipation. Emma spent longer than usual choosing her outfit, eventually settling on a casual sweater and jeans. Not trying too hard, but not dismissive either. I opted for a similar approach, leaving the business suits behind for once. Rebecca was uncharacteristically quiet as we drove to the coffee shop, staring out the window with an expression I couldn't read. Was she nervous? Excited? Regretful? After nearly 17 years of marriage, I found myself unable to decipher her thoughts, and the realization was its own kind of loss. Daniel was already there when we arrived, sitting at a corner table with 3 cups in front of him. He stood as we approached, his smile tentative, his eyes immediately finding Emma. "I took a chance on orders," he said, gesturing to the cups. "Hot chocolate for Emma. Your mom mentioned you're not big on coffee, and black coffee for both of you." He nodded toward Rebecca and me, a presumptuous move, ordering for us, but I let it pass. This wasn't about me. It was about Emma, who was hovering slightly behind my shoulder, her expression a careful blank. "Thank you," she said politely, sliding into a chair across from him. Rebecca and I took seats on either side of her, a united front, whether intentional or not. An awkward silence settled over the table. Daniel cleared his throat. So, Emma, your mum tells me you're looking at colleges already? Any favorites? Emma relaxed slightly at the familiar topic. I'm interested in Northwestern for their journalism program, and maybe UC Berkeley. Journalism, huh? That's impressive. You must be a good writer. She's excellent, I interjected, unable to help myself. She's been editor of the school paper since sophomore year. They've won state awards under her leadership. Emma glanced at me, a small smile of appreciation crossing her face. Dad's exaggerating, but I do enjoy it. Daniel nodded, absorbing the casual reference to me as Dad with a slight tightening around his eyes. That's great, really great. The conversation continued haltingly, Daniel asking questions, Emma providing careful answers, Rebecca occasionally filling in gaps. I remained mostly silent, observing the interaction, noting how Daniel leaned forward eagerly whenever Emma spoke, how his eyes traced her features as if searching for himself in her face. After about 20 minutes, Emma straightened in her chair, setting down her hot chocolate with deliberate precision. I have some questions, she said, her voice stronger than it had been. If that's okay. Daniel nodded quickly. Of course. Anything. Why did you leave? Direct, unflinching. My heart swelled with pride at her courage. Daniel's face fell, his hands fidgeting with his coffee cup. That's fair. You deserve the truth. He took a deep breath. I was an addict, Emma. Alcohol primarily, but other substances too. When your mom told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I wasn't capable of being a father. I could barely take care of myself. So I ran. Emma absorbed this, her expression unreadable. And now? Mom says you're sober. 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days, he confirmed. 1 day at a time, as they say in the program. Why now? Why wait until I'm 16? Daniel glanced at Rebecca before answering. I tried once before when you were about 10. I called your mom, but she, rightfully, didn't want me anywhere near you. I wasn't stable yet, wasn't reliable. This time, when I reached out, I had proof to show her. Steady employment record, sobriety chips, recommendations from my sponsor. Steady employment, I repeated, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Including your new position at Parker Systems? Daniel's eyes widened slightly, genuine surprise crossing his face. You know about that? It's my company, I said flatly. Of course I know. Rebecca looked between us, confusion evident. What are you talking about? Daniel has accepted a position as a night janitor at my company, I explained, watching her face carefully. Starting Monday. I had no idea, she said, and I believed her. The surprise in her eyes was too genuine to be feigned. Daniel cleared his throat uncomfortably. I didn't realize the connection at first. The application was through. A contractor. When I saw the company name on the paperwork, I almost backed out, but he shrugged. It's a good opportunity. Better pay than my last position. Better hours. Quite a coincidence, I remarked, not bothering to keep the skepticism from my voice. Dad, Emma said quietly, a gentle warning in her tone. I nodded, conceding to her unspoken request to keep things civil. This was her meeting, her questions that needed answering. Emma turned back to Daniel. Did you ever think about me during those years? The raw vulnerability in her question made my chest ache. No matter how composed she appeared, she was still a young girl trying to understand why she hadn't been enough for someone to stay. Daniel's eyes glistened. Every day, he said hoarsely, every single day I kept a picture, just a sonogram your mother had given me before I left. It was the only thing I never pawned or lost, even at my worst. And when I got sober, making amends to you was at the top of my list. But I had to earn that right first, had to become someone worthy of even asking for your forgiveness. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel, she finally admitted. I'm not sure what you want from me. I don't want anything you're not willing to give. Daniel said quickly. "Just a chance to know you, on whatever terms you're comfortable with. We can start small, coffee once a month, text messages, whatever feels right to you." Emma nodded slowly. "I think I'd like that. To start small, I mean." And with those simple words, a door was opened that could never be fully closed again. The changes began subtly. A text message here, a brief call there. Emma carefully navigating this new relationship with Daniel while maintaining the rhythms of our family life. She was conscientious about it, often showing me her phone when Daniel sent her something funny or interesting, as if to reassure me that there were no secrets, nothing to fear in this connection. Rebecca, for her part, seemed to retreat somewhat, perhaps recognizing the harm her impulsiveness had caused. She was more attentive at home, suggesting family movie nights, asking about my work with genuine interest, making my favorite meals unprompted. It felt like an apology she couldn't quite bring herself to verbalize. I tried to be supportive of Emma's cautious exploration of her relationship with Daniel. When she mentioned he'd invited her to see a movie, I simply asked which one, and if she'd enjoy that. When she wavered, uncertain if she was ready for solo time with him, I assured her there was no rush, that she could set the pace that felt comfortable to her. But at work, I maintained vigilant awareness of Daniel's presence in my building. Security. Logs showed he arrived promptly each night at 10 p.m. and left at 6 a.m., cleaning the lower floors of the building with the efficiency his supervisor praised in weekly reports. He never attempted to access the executive floor where my office was. Located, never lingered near areas related to me specifically. By all accounts, he was simply doing the job he was hired to do. And yet, knowing he was there, moving through the spaces I considered my domain during the hours I was home with the family he had abandoned, created a persistent unease I couldn't shake. 3 weeks after our coffee shop meeting, I was working. Late, finalizing details for a major client presentation the following morning. The office was largely empty, most employees having departed hours earlier. I was so absorbed in spreadsheets and slides that I barely registered the sound of a vacuum in the hallway until it stopped abruptly, followed by a gentle knock on my open door. Daniel stood there, vacuum in hand, his expression cautious. "Sorry to disturb you, Mr. Parker. I can come back later if you're busy." The formality of Mr. Parker felt bizarre, coming from the man who shared DNA with my daughter, who had sat across from me discussing visitation schedules over coffee. "It's fine," I said, straightening in my chair. "Go ahead." He hesitated, then moved into the office with his cleaning equipment, beginning with the waste baskets, emptying them with practiced efficiency. I turned back to my laptop, attempting to focus on the presentation, but acutely aware of his presence, the soft sounds of his work. "Emma told me she got an A on her history project," he said, after a few minutes of silence. "The one about Supreme Court decisions." I looked up, surprised by the casual conversation. "Yes, she worked hard on it." Daniel nodded, moving to vacuum a corner of the office. "She said you helped her practice her presentation, that you always make time for things like that." There was something in his tone, not resentment exactly, but a wistfulness that made me pause. "That's what parents do," I said simply. Daniel's hands stilled on the vacuum. "Yes," he agreed quietly. "That's what good parents do." He resumed his work, silent for a moment before adding, "She's lucky to have had you." The past tense wasn't lost on me. "Had," he glanced up, seeming to realize his mistake. "Has," he corrected quickly. "She's lucky to have you." I studied him, trying to discern his angle, his motivation. "Why Parker Systems, Daniel? Out of all the companies in this city, why apply to work at mine?" He sighed, turning off the vacuum and facing me directly. "Honestly, because it paid better than my last job, had night hours that worked with my schedule, and was within walking distance of my apartment." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. When I realized it was your company, I almost withdrew my application. But I need this job, Mr. Parker, and I thought, maybe naively, that it showed I was serious about stability, about making a sustainable life. A life that conveniently intersects with my family, I pointed out. A life that intersects with my daughter, he corrected, then immediately held up a hand. Sorry. I know how that sounds. I know she's your daughter in all the ways that matter. I'm not trying to take that from you. Aren't you? I couldn't help asking. Isn't that exactly what this gradual insertion into our lives is about? Daniel shook his head. No, it's about me finally facing my responsibilities, however belatedly. It's about Emma having the chance to know where she comes from, if she wants to. He hesitated, then added, and it's about me trying to make amends for the worst mistake of my life. The sincerity in his voice was difficult to dismiss, but 16 years of absence wasn't erased by a few weeks of good intentions. Emma is my priority, I said firmly. Her emotional well-being, her sense of security, her happiness. If this relationship with you starts to negatively impact any of those things, it stops immediately. I understand, Daniel said, and I agree. This is all on her terms, at her pace. I nodded, a tacit acknowledgement of this uneasy truce between us. You can finish cleaning now. He resumed vacuuming, and I turned back to my presentation, the strange domesticity of the moment not lost on me. Daniel Walker, the man who had abandoned his unborn child, was now literally cleaning up after me in the company I had built while raising his daughter. Life had a perverse sense of irony sometimes. When I arrived home that night, later than usual, I found Emma still awake, sitting at the kitchen island with her laptop open and a mug of tea beside her. "Hey, Dad," she said, looking up with a smile. "How was work?" "Fine," I said, not mentioning my encounter with Daniel, "just finalizing the Westridge presentation. What are you still doing up? It's late." She gestured to her laptop. "College application, essay draft. I wanted to get your feedback on it before I submit it." "Now?" I asked, surprised. "It's almost midnight." "I know you're busy," she said with a small shrug, "and this is important to me. But it can wait until tomorrow if you're tired." I set down my briefcase, deeply touched by her consideration, by the fact that my opinion still mattered so much to her. "It's never too late for this," I told her, sliding onto the stool beside her. "Let me see what you've got." She turned the laptop toward me, watching my face anxiously as I began to read. The essay was about resilience, about finding strength in unexpected challenges. It was good, thoughtful and articulate, but there was something cautious about it, something that held back the true Emma I knew. "It's well written," I said carefully, "but it doesn't quite sound like you. It's missing your voice, your perspective." She nodded slowly. "I know, I've been rewriting it for days, trying to make it perfect, but it keeps coming out generic." "What's the real story you want to tell?" I asked. "Not what you think admissions officers want to hear, but what matters to you." Emma was quiet for a moment, tracing the rim of her mug with her finger. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately, about what makes someone a parent." She glanced up at me. "About what you've given me that has nothing to do with DNA." My throat tightened. "That would make a compelling essay," I managed. She smiled, a fragile, hopeful expression. "Would you help me with it? Tomorrow after school?" "Of course," I promised. Always. As I climbed into bed later, Rebecca stirred, turning toward me in the darkness. "Everything okay?" she murmured sleepily. "You're home late." "Everything's fine," I said, and was surprised to realize I meant it. Despite the complexities, despite Daniel's presence at work and in our lives, what mattered most remained intact. Emma still turned to me as her father, still valued my guidance, still wanted me involved in her most important decisions. For tonight, at least, That was enough. Over the next month, a new normal gradually established itself. Emma met with Daniel once a week, usually for lunch on Saturdays or a quick coffee after school. She would return from these meetings thoughtful but not upset, often sharing small details with me. His favorite books matched hers. He had played baseball in high school. He was taking night classes in computer science at the community college. Little fragments that she was collecting, piecing together the puzzle of her biological heritage. At work, Daniel and I maintained a professional distance. He continued his night shifts, performed his duties efficiently, and our paths rarely crossed. The few times we encountered each other, we exchanged brief, polite nods. Two men circling each other cautiously, connected by a daughter, neither was willing to hurt with open hostility. Rebecca seemed both relieved by the tentative peace and anxious about its fragility. She walked a careful line, supporting Emma's relationship with Daniel without actively promoting it, checking in with me more frequently about how I was feeling, trying to bridge gaps before they widened. It was an uneasy equilibrium, but one we were all managing to maintain. Until the night of Emma's school fundraiser. The event was an annual tradition, a formal dinner and silent auction to raise money for the school's scholarship fund. As a major donor, our family always attended. Emma was particularly invested. This year, having helped organize the student art exhibition that accompanied the auction, we arrived as a family, Emma stunning in a navy blue dress that made her look older than her 16 years, her hair swept up elegantly, the diamond pendant I had given her for her birthday glinting at her throat. Rebecca wore a simple black cocktail dress, and I had opted for my best suit. We looked like what we had always been, a unified family, successful and put together. The evening began smoothly. We mingled with other parents, admired the student artwork, placed bids on auction items. Emma gave a short speech about the art exhibition that made my chest swell with pride. Rebecca squeezed my hand as we watched her, a quiet moment of shared appreciation for the remarkable young woman we had raised. It was during the dinner service that I noticed Emma's expression change, her eyes fixed on something across the room. I followed her gaze and felt my stomach drop. Daniel stood by the entrance, dressed in an ill-fitting suit that had seen better days, a small wrapped package in his hands. He looked nervous, out of place among the wealthy parents and educators, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Emma. Rebecca noticed him at the same moment I did. "What is he doing here?" she whispered, sounding genuinely surprised. "You didn't invite him?" I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice. "Of course not," she replied quickly. "This is a school function. Why would I—" She broke off. As Emma stood, giving us an apologetic look, "I invited him," she admitted quietly. "He asked what I was doing this weekend, and I mentioned the fundraiser. He seemed interested, so I told him he could come." She hesitated, clearly reading the tension in my expression. "I should have asked first. I'm sorry." Before I could respond, Emma was moving across the room toward Daniel, greeting him with a hesitant hug. I watched as she accepted the small package, opening it to reveal what appeared to be a vintage fountain pen. Her smile was genuine as she thanked him, then guided him toward our table. "Dad, Mom," she said when they reached us, her voice carefully neutral. "Daniel wanted to support the fundraiser. I told him it was okay to join us." She glanced at me, a silent plea in her eyes. "Please be civil. Please don't make a scene." I stood, extending my hand to Daniel with a tight smile. "Of course. Good to see you again, Daniel." He shook my hand, his grip firm but not challenging. "Thank you for having me. It's a wonderful event for a good cause." He turned to Rebecca. "The venue looks beautiful. Emma mentioned you helped with the decorations committee." Rebecca smiled politely, though I could see the strain around her eyes. "Thank you, it was a team effort." As Daniel took the empty seat beside Emma, I caught the curious glances from neighboring tables, the whispered conversations behind hands. Of course, people would talk. Many knew our family, knew I had been Emma's father since she was a toddler. The sudden appearance of another man, clearly being introduced as someone significant to Emma, would spark inevitable speculation. The discomfort of public scrutiny added another layer to my already complicated emotions. This was no longer a private family matter contained within the walls of our home. Daniel's presence here, at a school event, made his re-entry into Emma's life visible to our entire social circle. The remainder of dinner was an exercise in strained politeness. Daniel was clearly trying to make a good impression, engaging in appropriate conversation, complimenting the food, asking thoughtful questions about the scholarship program. Emma divided her attention between him and us, a diplomat in her own family drama. During the dessert course, Emma excused herself to check on the art exhibition, leaving the three adults in a moment of awkward silence. "She's really proud of that exhibition," Daniel said finally. "She showed me pictures of some of the artwork last week. Remarkable talent in these kids." "Yes," I agreed, absently turning my coffee cup. "Emma has always had a good eye for talent. She gets that from her mother." Rebecca smiled faintly at the compliment, then looked at Daniel with unexpected directness. "Why did you really come tonight, Daniel? This isn't exactly your usual scene." He considered her question, his fingers fidgeting with his napkin. "Because Emma invited me," he said simply. "Because she wanted to share this part of her life with me, and that matters to me." "And the suit? The gift?" Rebecca pressed. "That seems like a lot of effort for a school fundraiser." Daniel's cheeks flushed slightly. "I wanted to fit in, to not embarrass her." He glanced down at his suit. "I know it's not like what everyone else is wearing, thrift store special, but I tried." The vulnerability in his admission was disarming. I found myself seeing him differently for a moment, not as a threat or an intruder, but as a man desperately trying to reconnect with the daughter he had lost, willing to endure discomfort and potential humiliation for even a small place in her life. "The pen was thoughtful," I said, surprising myself with the concession. "Emma loves writing, always has." Daniel nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "She mentioned that journalism program she's interested in. The pen was my grandfather's, one of the few family heirlooms I didn't lose during my darker years. I thought she might appreciate something with a bit of history." He paused, then added quietly, "She doesn't have much from my side of the family." The implication hung between us. Emma had material wealth, opportunities and advantages from my side, but nothing of her biological heritage. The pen represented something I couldn't give her, no matter how many gifts I purchased or college funds I established. Our conversation was interrupted by the return of Emma, accompanied by her favorite English teacher who wanted to introduce us to a potential college contact. As we stood to greet them, I caught sight of Daniel's expression as he watched Emma. Pride mixed with profound regret, the look of someone seeing all they had missed, all they had thrown away. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider that Daniel's intentions might be genuine, that his presence in Emma's life might not be about disrupting what I had built or reclaiming what he had abandoned, but simply about knowing the remarkable person his daughter had become. The realization was uncomfortable. It was easier to view him as a threat, as someone with ulterior motives. Acknowledging his humanity, his genuine desire for connection with Emma, meant recognizing that this situation wasn't as black and white as I wanted it to be. As the evening wound down, Emma prepared to leave with us as planned. Daniel said his goodbyes, thanking us for including him, promising Emma he'd text her tomorrow. As he walked away, Emma turned to me with an expression that combined hope and uncertainty. "Was it okay?" she asked quietly. "That he came?" I looked at my daughter, this young woman caught between two fathers, navigating a complexity no teenager should have to face, and I found I couldn't begrudge her this attempt to integrate the disparate parts of her life. It was okay, I assured her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. He seems to care about you. She leaned into me, relief evident in her posture. He's not trying to replace you, Dad. No one could. I want to know him, to understand that part of myself. As we walked to the car, I held on to those words like a lifeline. No one could replace me. I was still her father, still the man who had raised her, loved her, shaped her into the person she was becoming. But for the first time, I truly understood that Emma's world was expanding to include Daniel, not as a replacement, but as an addition. And I would need to find a way to accept that, for her sake, if not for my own. 2 days after the fundraiser, I was in my office reviewing quarterly projections when Valerie buzzed my intercom. "Mr. Parker, there's a situation in the break room on the 3rd floor. Security thought you should know." Something in her tone made me immediately alert. "What kind of situation?" A pause. "It involves Mr. Walker." I was out of my chair before she finished speaking, moving swiftly to the elevator. My mind raced through possibilities. Had Daniel caused a disturbance? Broken something? Been inappropriate? With other staff? Whatever it was, I needed to contain it quickly. When I reached the 3rd floor break room, I found a small crowd gathered. Several members of the marketing team, a few IT specialists, and security officer Mike Reynolds standing. Near Daniel, who sat at a table with a young woman I recognized as Allison Chen, one of our promising new developers. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice carrying enough authority to part the crowd. Mike stepped forward. "Mr. Parker, we received a report of an unauthorized person accessing secure areas. When I arrived, I found Mr. Walker here having lunch with Ms. Chen." Daniel looked up, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and defiance. "I wasn't accessing secure areas. I was just having lunch with my nephew's wife." Allison nodded, her face flushed. "It's true, Mr. Parker. Daniel is married to my husband's uncle. When I found out he worked here, I invited him to have lunch with me. I didn't realize it would be a problem." I stared at Daniel, processing this new information. "Your nephew works here?" "Not exactly," Daniel explained. "My nephew Ethan is married to Allison. When she mentioned she worked at Parker Systems, I told her I was on the night cleaning crew here. She suggested we have lunch sometime." He gestured to the sandwich in front of him. "That's all this is." The explanation was reasonable enough, but something felt off. The connection was too convenient. First, Daniel takes a job at my company, and now I discover he has family ties to one of our employees. The coincidences were stacking up too neatly. "Ms. Chen, how long have you worked here?" I asked. 6 months. "Sir?" she replied promptly. "And how long has your husband been married to Daniel's nephew?" 3 years. Her gaze was steady, innocent. I turned to Daniel. "And you just happened to never mention this connection when you applied for the position?" He shrugged. It didn't seem relevant. I didn't even know Allison worked here until after I started. "We're not exactly close family." The explanation was plausible, but my suspicion remained. Was Daniel deliberately inserting himself into multiple aspects of my life? First as Emma's biological father, then as an employee in my company, and now connected to another employee. The pattern suggested intent rather than coincidence. "Mike, please escort Mr. Walker back to the maintenance area. His lunch break is over." I turned to the assembled staff. "The rest of you, back to work, please." As the crowd dispersed, I nodded for Allison to remain. Once we were alone, I sat across from her. "Ms. Chen, you're doing excellent work here." The Westridge integration was particularly impressive. She smiled, relief visible in her posture. "Thank you, sir. I need to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Did anyone suggest you apply to Parker Systems specifically? Did Daniel or anyone in his family mention this company to you before you applied?" Her brow furrowed in confusion. "No, sir. I applied because of your reputation for innovative work environments and because the development position matched my skills perfectly. She hesitated. Is there a problem? Have I done something wrong? No, I assured her. This isn't about your performance. Thank you for your candor. I left her looking confused but returned to my office with my mind racing. Perhaps there was no conspiracy, no deliberate plan to infiltrate my company. Perhaps these really were coincidences, strange as they seemed. But the seed of doubt had been planted and it continued to grow. That evening I arrived home to find Rebecca and Emma in a heated discussion in the kitchen, their voices carrying down the hallway. It's just one weekend, Mom. Why are you being so difficult about this? Because it's too much, too soon. A day trip is one thing, but staying at his apartment overnight is completely different. I paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Emma, standing with arms crossed, Rebecca at the counter chopping vegetables with unnecessary force. What's going on? I asked cautiously. Emma turned to me, relief crossing her face. Dad, tell Mom she's overreacting. Daniel invited me to go to the coast this weekend. There's a journalism workshop at the community college there, and he thought I'd be interested. It's just one night. Rebecca set down her knife with a sharp click. He wants her to stay at his apartment, James, overnight, after knowing him for, 2 months? 6 weeks, Emma corrected, then immediately realized this didn't strengthen her argument. But I'm 16, not 6. And it's not like he's a stranger. He's my biological father. Exactly, Rebecca said. He's your biological father who was absent for 16 years. That doesn't automatically grant him overnight privileges. I found myself in the unusual position of agreeing with Rebecca, though her vehemence surprised me, given her initial enthusiasm for Daniel's return. Emma, I said carefully, I understand why this workshop interests you, but your mother has a point. Overnight stays represent a significant step in any relationship. Emma's face fell. So you're both against me now? This isn't about being against you, I explained. It's about appropriate boundaries and timing. Daniel said you'd react this way, she muttered, looking away. He said you'd try to control my relationship with him because you feel threatened. The words hit like a physical blow. He said that to you? Emma immediately looked regretful. Not exactly like that. He just said it might be hard for you to adjust. That sometimes people get territorial when they feel their position is being challenged. And do you believe that's what this is? I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. Me being territorial. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe a little. You've been weird ever since he showed up. Rebecca stepped in, her voice gentler than before. Emma, this is a complex situation for everyone. Your father isn't being territorial. He's being protective. As am I. We're your parents. That's our job. Daniel is my parent too, Emma said, lifting her chin. Biologically, at least. The simple statement, delivered without malice but with firm conviction, created a silence heavy with unspoken emotions. Biology doesn't make someone a parent, I finally said. 16 years of love, support, guidance, that's what makes a parent. I know that, Emma replied, her voice softening slightly. You've always been my dad, and that's not changing. But can't I have room to know him too, to figure out what kind of relationship we might have? It was a reasonable question, one that deserved a thoughtful answer, rather than a knee-jerk refusal born of jealousy or insecurity. What if we compromise, I suggested. You attend the workshop, but stay in a hotel room that we pay for. We'll drive you there and pick you up, and you can spend the day with Daniel. Emma considered this, clearly weighing her desire for independence against the offered alternative. Fine, she conceded eventually, but I don't need you to drive me. Daniel already offered. Then he can pick you up at the hotel in the morning and bring you back in the evening, I countered, holding firm on this point. Emma rolled her eyes, but nodded. Whatever. I'm going to call him and explain the new plan. As she left the room, phone already in hand, Rebecca turned to me with a troubled expression. "Did you hear what she said? Daniel is my parent too. After 6 weeks, she's already elevating him to our level." I leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. "She's trying to make sense of all this, Rebecca, trying to find where he fits in her life." "And where does that leave you?" she asked quietly. It was the question I'd been asking myself since the moment Daniel reappeared. Where did his presence leave me in Emma's life, in our family dynamic? The answer had seemed clear initially, diminished, replaced, superfluous. But now I wasn't so sure. "Right where I've always been," I said finally, "as her father, the one who makes the hard calls, enforces boundaries, puts her welfare above her temporary wants." I met Rebecca's gaze directly. "The one who stays, no matter what." The morning we were supposed to drive Emma to the coastal hotel for her journalism workshop, she was uncharacteristically quiet. She packed her overnight bag with careful precision, double-checking her notebook and laptop, avoiding eye contact as we moved around each other in the hallway. "All set?" I asked, keys already in hand. She nodded, shouldering her bag. "Yeah, I think so." Rebecca emerged from the bedroom, her expression a careful neutral. "Do you have your charger? Your toothbrush?" "Yes, Mom," Emma sighed, the familiar teenage exasperation momentarily overriding the tension. "I'm 16, not 6, remember?" The drive to the coast took just over an hour. Emma spent most of it with earbuds in, staring out the window at the passing scenery. Rebecca tried a few conversational openings, questions about the workshop, about what she hoped to learn, but received only minimal responses. The silence gave me time to think, to process the whirlwind of the past weeks. Daniel's reappearance had shaken the foundation of our family in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just his presence in Emma's life that unsettled me. It was how quickly she had accepted him, how readily she had created space for him, as if there had always been a Daniel-shaped hole in her life that I had failed to notice. After checking Emma into the hotel and confirming the arrangements for Daniel to pick her up the following morning, we said our goodbyes in the lobby. Her hug was brief, perfunctory, her mind clearly already on the day ahead. "Have a good time at the workshop," I said. "Call us tonight to check in." "I will," she promised, already pulling out her phone, texting Daniel, I assumed, to let him know. We had arrived. The drive back home was quieter still. Rebecca stared out the passenger window, her profile etched with worry. "She'll be fine," I said, attempting reassurance. "It's one night." "It's not just one night, though, is it?" Rebecca replied softly. "It's the beginning of something. A shift." I couldn't argue with that assessment. The family we had been, the three of us, a unit complete unto ourselves, was changing irreversibly. Daniel wasn't going away. His connection to Emma was growing. And I was being forced to redefine my role, my identity as her father, in real time. At home, the house felt strangely empty. Emma's absence had never bothered me before. She had gone to sleepovers, school trips, weekends with friends. But this absence felt different, loaded with meaning. She wasn't just away, she was with him, learning about him, discovering the parts of herself that came from him, forming memories that wouldn't include me. I retreated to my home office, burying myself in work to avoid spiraling thoughts. Rebecca moved restlessly through the house, reorganizing drawers, folding laundry, keeping her hands busy in that way she did when anxiety gnawed at her. Around dinner time, she appeared in my office doorway. "I made pasta," she said simply. "Are you hungry?" We ate in near silence, the usual family chatter conspicuously absent. Halfway through the meal, Rebecca set down her fork. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, "for all of this, for how I handled it." I looked up, surprised by the directness of her apology. "Which part specifically?" "The ambush at her birthday, not talking to you first. All of it." She pushed her food around her plate. I got caught up in this fantasy, I guess, that Daniel had changed, that Emma deserved to know him, that it could all be easy and positive. I nodded slowly, acknowledging her words. Why now, Rebecca? After all these years of never mentioning him, of acting like he didn't exist, why did his reappearance affect you so strongly? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. I think I was trying to fix something from the past, to rewrite the story of Emma's beginning. She met my eyes, and in doing that I risked something precious in the present. Us, our family. The admission hung between us, weighted with truth. For the first time since Daniel's re-emergence, I felt like I was seeing the real Rebecca again. My partner, the woman who had built this life alongside me, not the stranger who had seemed so eager to welcome her ex back into our world. We'll figure this out, I told her, reaching across the table to take her hand. Together, she squeezed my hand, gratitude in her eyes. Together. The call came at 11:38 p.m. I had just drifted off to sleep when my phone rang, Emma's face lighting up the screen. "Emma, everything okay?" I answered, immediately alert. There was a pause, then a shaky exhale. "Dad, can you come get me?" I was already swinging my legs out of bed, reaching for my jeans. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Her voice caught. "I want to come home." Rebecca was awake now, watching me with concerned eyes. "We'll be there in an hour," I promised. "Sit tight." We dressed quickly, grabbing keys and wallets, not bothering with coffee despite the late hour. Adrenaline was enough. Rebecca called Emma back as I drove, getting minimal details. She was safe in her hotel room, but something had happened with Daniel that she didn't want to discuss over the phone. The coastal highway was nearly empty at midnight, allowing me to push well above the speed limit. Neither of us spoke much, both consumed with scenarios of what might have transpired. At the hotel, Emma was waiting in the lobby, her overnight bag at her feet, looking smaller and younger than she had that morning. When she saw us, something in her expression crumbled. I reached her first, wrapping her in a hug that she returned with unexpected fierceness. "Let's get you home," I said, taking her bag. She nodded, following us to the car without explanation. We were halfway back to the city before she spoke. "Daniel's been drinking." The simple statement hung in the car like a physical presence. Rebecca turned in her seat. "I thought he was sober." 3 years, he said. "That's what he told me too." Emma's voice was flat, disillusioned. "We had dinner after the workshop. Everything was fine. He was asking about my college plans, telling me about his classes at the community college." She paused. Then his phone rang. I don't know who it was, but afterward he seemed upset, said he needed a drink to calm his nerves, just one. I watched her in the rearview mirror, her face illuminated by passing streetlights. "One turned into more?" She nodded. "He said he could handle it, that one night didn't erase 3 years of sobriety, but he kept drinking, started talking about the past, about how much he regretted leaving, how different things could have been." Her voice dropped lower. "He said some things about you, about Mom." Rebecca tensed beside me. "What things, sweetheart?" "That you kept me from him. That Dad was just a replacement. That he was my real father, no matter what anyone said." Emma's eyes met mine in the mirror. "I told him to stop, that he was being unfair, that you've been my dad in every way that matters." He got angry, said I'd been brainwashed. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Did he hurt you, threaten you?" "No," she said quickly. "Nothing like that. He just changed. Like a switch flipped. He wasn't the person I'd been getting to know these past weeks. He started crying, then got belligerent with the server. It was embarrassing." She looked out the window. "I told him I was going to the restroom and called you instead." "You did the right thing," Rebecca assured her. He texted me about 20. On times while I was waiting for you, Emma continued, scrolling through her phone. Apologies, promises to make it up to me, then angry messages saying I was just like Mom, that I'd abandon him too. She looked up, her expression troubled. Is that what happened before I was born? Was he like this? Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. Yes, she finally admitted. The drinking, the mood swings, the promises to change. It was a cycle that never ended, until he left. He told me he was different now, Emma said, her voice small. I believed him. People can change, I said carefully. But change is hard and fragile. One stressful moment, one bad decision, and old patterns can resurface. Emma was silent for several minutes. I feel so stupid, she finally said, like I got caught up in this fantasy of having this other dad, this missing piece of my life. But it wasn't real. Not stupid, I corrected gently. Hopeful. There's a difference. As we neared home, Emma spoke again. Dad, I don't think I want to see him again, at least not for a while. The words should have brought me relief, vindication even. Instead, I felt a complicated sadness. For Emma's disappointment, for Daniel's failure, for the promising relationship that had collapsed under the weight of old demons. That's your decision to make, I told her, and we'll support whatever you choose. For the first time that night, she smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. I know you will. You always do. Daniel didn't come to work the following Monday or Tuesday. By Wednesday, HR informed me that he had resigned via email, citing personal circumstances that prevented him from continuing. I accepted his resignation without comment, refusing to indulge the complicated mix of relief and concern his departure evoked. Emma had been quiet since our midnight retrieval, processing her disappointment in her own way. She deleted Daniel's text messages without reading them, turned down his calls until they eventually stopped coming. At 16, she had already learned a painful lesson about the gap between promises and actions, about how the past can shape the present in ways we don't always anticipate. 2 weeks after the incident, Emma knocked on my home office door on a Saturday afternoon, a large envelope in her hands. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I set aside my laptop. Always, she sat across from me, sliding the envelope across the desk. "My college application essay, the final version. I'd like you to read it." I opened the envelope carefully, aware of the significance of her sharing this with me first, before submission. The title caught my attention immediately, "The Father Who Chose Me." As I read, my throat tightened with emotion. Emma had written eloquently about what it means to be a parent, not as a biological fact, but as a daily choice, a commitment renewed. Through years of ordinary moments and extraordinary ones, she wrote about my teaching her to ride a bike, helping with science projects, coaching her through her first heartbreak, showing up consistently when it mattered most. Then she addressed the recent appearance of her biological father, the brief connection and subsequent disillusionment, not with bitterness, but with a wisdom beyond her years. Meeting my biological father taught me that DNA is just chemistry. It creates resemblances, predispositions, perhaps even inclinations, but it doesn't create love. It doesn't generate commitment or sacrifice, or the quiet strength that comes from showing up every day for 16 years. Those things are choices. And I am fortunate that my father, the man who has raised me since I was a toddler, has chosen me, chosen our family, every single day of my life. I looked up to find Emma watching me anxiously. "What do you think? Is it too personal?" "It's perfect," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Honest and insightful. Any college would be lucky to have you." She smiled, relief visible in her expression. "It helped me sort through everything. Writing about it, I mean." "And have you sorted through it?" She considered the question. "Mostly." I'm still sad about how things ended with Daniel. I think part of me will always wonder what might have been if things were different. But I'm also grateful for what I learned. She met my eyes directly. About what really makes someone a father. 3 days later, I was working late at the office when my security badge alerted me to an after-hours visitor to the executive floor. The security feed showed Daniel Walker standing uncertainly by the reception desk. I could have had security, remove him. Part of me wanted to. But something in his posture, deflated, hesitant, nothing like the man who had confidently inserted himself into our lives, made me pause. "Send him in," I told the security officer via intercom. Daniel entered my office looking worse than I'd ever seen him. Unshaven, eyes bloodshot, the confident posture replaced by a man clearly carrying the weight of his mistakes. "I won't take much of your time," he said, remaining standing even when I gestured to a chair. "I just wanted to apologize for everything." I studied him, searching for signs of insincerity or manipulation. I found none. "Emma doesn't want contact right now," I said. "I think you need to respect that." "I know," he nodded. "I've stopped calling. I'll stop everything. She deserves better than what I can offer right now." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. I thought I was ready. 3 years sober, stable job, therapy. I thought I could handle being in her life. But one bad call, one moment of weakness, and I proved I'm still the same man who ran 16 years ago. The rawness of his self-assessment was disarming. "Recovery isn't linear," I found myself saying. "Relapse happens. It's what you do afterward that matters." A bitter smile crossed his face, spoken like someone who's never had to crawl back from rock bottom. "Trust me, some mistakes can't be fixed with platitudes." "I wasn't offering platitudes," I replied evenly, "just acknowledging reality. People fail, they try again. Sometimes they succeed." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "You've been good to her. A good father." The admission seemed to cost him something. Better than I could have been, even at my best. "That's not a competition anyone needed to have," I said. "No," he agreed, "but I made it one, didn't I? Trying to reclaim something I threw away." He moved toward the door, then paused. "I'm checking into a rehab facility tomorrow, 90 days. After that, I'm moving back to Oregon where my brother lives. Clean start." I nodded, acknowledging his plan without comment. "Could you tell Emma? Not now, but someday when she might be ready to hear it. That I'm sorry, that I'm trying, that she deserves better than what I gave her. I'll tell her," I promised, "when the time is right." After he left, I sat in my quiet office for a long time, thinking about fatherhood, about choices, about the complicated paths that lead people in and out of each other's lives. Daniel Walker had entered our family like a storm, disruptive, chaotic, threatening to wash away the foundations we had built. But in the aftermath, those foundations stood, stronger than before. Emma understood now, in a way she hadn't before, what it meant that I had chosen to be her father. Rebecca had remembered why she had chosen me to help raise her daughter, and I had been reminded of a truth I had momentarily forgotten in my fear and insecurity, that being a father wasn't about biology or legal rights or even the years already invested. It was about continuing to choose this role, this responsibility, this love, every day, in every circumstance, without reservation or condition. Emma was my daughter, not by blood, but by choice, and that made her mine in the way that mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.